Thank you for joining me today. I haven't had a solo episode in a very long time. What I want to talk to you about today are profound lessons that I learned in 2024 and how they will change and sculpt my message in 2025. I am getting over a cold. I'm on like day 5, so my throat is a little raspy. Hopefully, I make it through, but I really wanted to record this for you as you head into a new year. So, I want to talk about some really profound lessons that I learned in 2024 and how I'll be showing up differently in 2025. So, before I start talking about the lessons, I do want to just do a really brief synopsis of experiences that I had in 2024. If you've been following me for a while and listening to this podcast, you probably know about a lot of them, but it's tough for me to talk about the lessons that I learned without kind of setting the stage because I feel like I'm a very different person than I was a year ago. I have a different message. I've undergone so many changes. But this all started about 18 months ago. My mom got diagnosed with metastatic cancer in her pancreas and liver. And for those of you who know cancer, this is not a good cancer diagnosis at all. She had had fatty liver for about 20, 30 years before that. So she was also already kind of sick. But this was at about the time I was at the peak of my business. Like my podcast was doing very well. It was ranking really high. It was in the top 50 of all nutrition podcasts. Pretty much every week it had climbed as high as number 12 in the nutrition podcast, which I had never ever dreamed of. And so it was hard for me to take a step back from my work and be with my mom. My mom opted chemotherapy, even though I wished that she hadn't. I had interviewed so many people with alternative cancer therapies. But of course, her oncologist basically dismissed me and what I was researching and told my mom that her best chances were chemo. But anyway, my mom did not take chemo well at all from the very first infusion. By Christmas time, she had a belly full of ascites and fluid and was very, very ill, had severe brain fog. And so I knew she was not long for this world. And then in January 23rd, I got a call from my dad. My mom had been taking chemotherapy pills by this time, which really did her in. She did not handle those well at all. Saying he couldn't get her to the bathroom and that she wasn't making sense. So anyway, we took her to the hospital and she was admitted to hospital where I was her power of attorney. She was so ill. She, just basically sleeping all the time. And, if she woke up, maybe a couple sentences, she'd mostly make sense, not always make sense. We thought she had maybe a couple of days, couple of weeks at most. Well, she hung on for 30. So this was really hard on all of us, right? My hometown that I grew up in is only about 50 minutes away from where I live now. So I could be to the hospital in under an hour. But at the same time, it was just easier for me to stay overnight there. My hometown that I grew up in has this adorable little hospital, but they also have a hospice suite there, and that was built on donations. So she was under the care of nursing staff and hospice staff, but she was not in her home, which was a blessing because we could not have cared for her in her home. So I was with her in the hospice suite for a good month, and she hung on for 30 days. But every day was almost like I was hostessing an event in the hospice suite. Like my mom has a very large family and a ton of friends, big church connections. So there's people coming every single day, every day. I mean, I was rarely there by myself. So I would try to get some work done while she was sleeping. But there was visitors all the time. And my grandma's still alive, my mom's mom, and she lives right by the hospital. So she was there every day, which was amazing. I got to spend a ton of time with her. But like I said, it was like I was hosting an event almost every day. Like, what do I need to order on the hospitality part? Who's coming today? When should I plan on them? It was a beautiful, yet really chaotic time. And my mom passed on February 23rd. It was really hard watching her wither away. It was very gradual. And I actually had a low insulin academy group going at this time that started in January that I'd been promoting before she went into hospice, and had a group of students. And that was difficult because I had to cancel a lot of the meetings. I had to cancel a lot of podcast interviews. In my head, I'm like, oh, no big deal. Like, I'll get back in the swing of things and it'll all be fine. And I couldn't show up for that low insulin academy group like I normally show up. So we made it through, but then after my mom passed away, I was left to plan her funeral, and my dad is not one for really planning anything. So that was all left to me, writing her obituary, just all of everything that went along with her funeral. Meanwhile, my dad's health is declining. We had my mom's funeral, and by May of last year, my dad fell. He was living on his own at this time. He fell getting out of the shower, and I had arranged Meals on Wheels for him a couple weeks or maybe a month prior to this. And both my sister and I had called him the night before, thought he was fine, but he fell after the Meals on Wheels had come and lay on his bathroom floor for about 20 hours. He could not get up to get his phone. He was not physically capable of that. So he lay there by himself until Meals on Wheels came the next day. They found him, sent him to the ER. He had another pretty bad heart attack. He had a massive heart attack in 2019. Had another heart attack. He was laying there stressed out, his congestive heart failure, fluid pooled around his heart. So he was in the hospital for about 10 days. And we didn't even think he'd be able to ever live on his own again, but he went to skilled nursing rehab for a month, and we moved him to assisted living. He did well there for a couple months, and then just started to decline around October and died November 13th, and had another funeral to plan. Never really recovered from the first one. My business was really, really suffering at this point. Somehow through all of it, I was able to come out with a new course. I came out with my cortisol calm course, which is really funny because I had severe cortisol issues from like 20 or 30 years back, couldn't figure out how to manage them, or I shouldn't say manage, how to get them back into the normal and balance out my cortisol. I could not figure it out. Well, I figured it out in 2024, despite having the most stressful, crazy time in my existence, and somehow got this course out, which I have not promoted at all because of everything that's going on. But anyway, my dad died and I was left to plan his funeral, all of his belongings, his accounts, like all of it. And I'm not the only one who's gone through this. I mean, this is nothing new. Humans lose their parents all the time. Everyone is going to lose their parents. Sometimes, might be before you die, but none of us get out of this alive, right? But when you're actually going through it yourself and in such a short time period, it's really just numbing. That's my best way to describe it. Like usually in my business, like when I'm walking or driving, I have all these ideas just going through my brain. Oh, I want to talk about this. I want to post about this. I want to make a reel about this. I really need to get this podcast guest on and share it with my community. There was like nothing. I'd open my computer, I'd close it back up. I'm like, nope, I can't do this. And this went on for weeks. I actually took a break from podcasting and content. I didn't put any content out for about 6 weeks, but that was really tough. That's the first break I'd taken since 2019 when I launched my business, but it was much, much needed. So after my dad's funeral in early December, I decided I'm just going to focus on my family and focus on Christmas. And all year long, I had been growing closer and closer to God, which I'll talk more about in a few minutes. But I just wanted to set the stage for my 2024, so you can kind of understand these profound lessons that I've learned that I really had no idea I was learning at the time. So if you're feeling like you're being stretched by God and you like don't know how you're going to get out of it, you don't know if you're going to emerge, I've been there. But the first lesson that I learned was letting go of perfectionism and how perfectionism can really just derail you. We're not perfect. We're not meant to be perfect, but my whole life, I've put my profound pressure on myself to be perfect and to achieve and, be the best at things. And so I've really let go of that because it's stressed me out for years. Nobody cares about things being perfect except me. And it took me far, far too long to accept it and how consuming it was. So that is one thing. It took up way too much space in my brain, way too much time of my day trying to get everything perfect, perfect posts, the perfect comments, the perfect guests, a perfect podcast topic, perfect hair, perfect clothing. And like it was just way too much. So I put that behind me. Definitely a work in progress. I'm still a very much a type A person. And this is something I'm working on, but God does not call us to be perfect. And we just can't be. We can never measure up. And the only perfect person was Jesus. And, no one's ever going to measure up to that. But that was one profound lesson that I learned. And one thing that came out on a topic I want to talk about that kind of goes along with that. Another thing that happened, the two big things that happened in my business in 2024 were that I developed cortisol calm. And I know that there's a huge reason for this. And I will be promoting it a lot in 2025. It's much, much needed. And I know that the steps that are outlined in that course and sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm coughing. The content that is outlined in that course is what you need to balance your cortisol. I'm not just guessing, like this is actually how you do it. But anyway, my cortisol calm course somehow got developed, and I went through a huge rebranding. I went from fasttoheal.info, my website, to shanahussenwellness.com, which again, I've hardly promoted at all. Like people don't even know that I went through a rebrand unless they're finding me for the first time and just see Shanna Husson Wellness. And so not that I don't believe in fasting, I do, but I believe there are a lot of nuances around it, especially for women that I've learned in the last year or so. But this rebranding was huge. Like if I would have known all that came out of the rebrand and all I had to do for it, I don't know if I would have done it. And now that it's done, great. But most of it was going on. Like this project went on from May to October. We were hoping to have it done like May to June, but then so much, that's when my dad had a heart attack and we had to move him and I had to, and then my sister and my family and I, we had to clean out their house and all summer. Like that's what I did most of the summer is I go to their house, sort through stuff. It's one of the hardest things you'll ever do if you have parents that need you to do this for them. So anyway, that was crazy. And then the rebrand, like I had to rewrite a lot of my website, my content, everything was rebranded, everything was redirected. All my sales pages needed to change and be redone. My email had to be changed, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but switching your email system and your email address is a big deal, especially when you have people working under you and they need theirs changes. So this was a huge project. I needed a new logo. Courses all needed to be updated with the new logo, the new colors. It was a huge, huge project. And there's still things on my website, which is now shanahussenwellness.com, that I want change and that need a lot of attention. But my web designer was at the point where we're like, okay, we're just launching this as is. It can go how it is. And that's where the, like stepping back from the perfectionism really took hold for me this year. And I just told myself, it's okay. It's not perfect. It's okay. Like nobody's going to go to my website and be like, oh my gosh, why does this look this way? Or I can't believe her sales page for this course is not finished. Like nobody knows these things except me. And so that was a huge part of just like, okay, I'm just rolling with it. I need to not care so much. So that was really a huge part of stepping away from perfectionism. But rebranding was huge. Now that it's done, of course, I'm really happy I did it. But at the time, it was a huge, huge stressor. And one that as my business is flailing and I'm just trying to stay afloat, one that the timing was terrible. Of course, so I didn't know this. I didn't know my dad was going to have a heart attack and I'm going to have to clean out their house and then he was going to die. Obviously, I didn't know that. But the timing was just not good. Okay, so lesson number 2 is that even though I just said the timing was horrible for that, the timing that God has planned for you in your life and everything that goes along with that for a long time, for the first couple of years in my business, as things were growing, I was, being asked to be podcast guest on many podcasts, and I was meeting some really cool people in my space. I mean, when I look back at everybody who I've interviewed on my podcast, I'm like, oh my God. And not only did I interview them, but I grew to be friends with a lot of them. And we collaborate, and it's really awesome. Like, I would have never met these people if I didn't have my podcast and my business. I want you to know that God's timing is perfect with everything. Those first couple of years when I was really growing and things were happening, things were kind of starting to get out of hand for me because things were growing at such a fast pace. And for a long time, it was just me. Like, I didn't have an assistant or anything. So now I have an assistant, and I have some other contractors that help me. But know that God's timing's perfect. And if you're not being asked to do something, so I was always wondering, like, why don't I, why aren't people asking me to go speak at conferences and be on the big stage? And all these people that are in my space are like, what's the deal? And I was getting kind of like self-centered about it. Like, I can't believe they're not asking me to be a speaker about this or whatever. It was just, looking back, God was protecting me because I was not ready. My message and my purpose is very clear now. I would have had a completely different message a couple years ago and a year ago than I do now. And so, and the other thing is, I'm really like, I come from a small town in Wisconsin. Like, I'm not this big stage kind of person. If I had been traveling all over the world, delivering messages and talking on stages, our family life would have suffered a lot. My husband has a very demanding job. He's gone a lot. He travels most weeks. He's gone at least a day or two, sometimes a lot more. That would have really derailed our family. And so God was protecting me from that. And I didn't see it at the time. He knew I had lessons to learn before, and I wouldn't be happy doing those types of things, even though in my head, I was thinking, like, why not me? Why not me? He knew why not. And so if something's not happening in your life that you really want, there's a reason for it. And you just need to trust him. Another thing that goes along with that was this book proposal that I had an agent get in contact with me. So I wrote my book, Fast to Heal. I self-published that on Amazon. So Fast to Heal has been available since April of 2020. But I was approached by a real agent in the fall of 2023, like when my mom was sick. And she wanted me to write another fasting book. And I said, yeah, great. There's a lot of things that weren't that I did include in Fast to Heal that I'd love to write about, and namely, like, women, like fasting for women, fasting as a therapy, all these things. She's like, okay, great. Can you have your proposal done by March? This was like November, I think. I'm like, oh, of course. Let me tell you, book proposals are huge. Like, I didn't really know what I was getting into. I mean, they are very extensive. And of course, then my mom got sick and contacted my agent. And I said, I'm very sorry, I can't get the proposal to you. I had it about half done by March. I'm like, I can't get this to you. This is what I have so far. And she was very understanding. She's like, great, this is going to be a fantastic book. Take your time. Let's aim for June instead. Thank you for your, being so gracious and understanding. Well, then my dad had a heart attack and we had to move him, blah, blah, blah. Like, the story. And I've never finished that book proposal. But again, I don't want to write that book anymore. I don't want to write that fasting book. I want to write a book on our cortisol crisis and how we can solve this in women, especially high-powered women who own businesses and are in very high-level jobs or high-level, they're very high level family, whatever it is, they're suffering. This is the book I want to write now. So again, wasn't right. That was not the book I was supposed to write. And so I've worried about this for like the last year and a half. Like, oh, I'm never going to get a book out, blah, blah, blah. Well, it wasn't meant to be. timing wasn't right. And so if I do get my book out, it's not going to be the book that I was going to write last year. Okay, third lesson is it's really important for you to stop looking at your past and beating yourself up for it and just look toward the future. Jesus has so much work left in you. And nowhere in the Bible did he ever say, look at your past, look what you did. No, he said, let's move forward. We have work to do. And so that is another very profound lesson that I learned. Like, we can't keep dwelling in a place, like with all of the rebranding and everything that went on. I've always been very transparent and very truthful about what I'm going through in my life, what I'm teaching and experiencing. And that gets me in trouble sometimes. I shouldn't say it gets me in trouble. I think people can get confused by it sometimes because I am so transparent. But that's okay. Like, I've learned that that's okay. And I'm not going to beat myself up for that. I'm going to use that as a gift, and I will always be honest and truthful with you. All right. So, the last lesson, this is the biggest lesson that I learned, was to really look at my idol and what I'm idolizing. I want you to do the same in 2025. What are you idolizing? What do you put all of your emotions and time investments? Like, what's your biggest investment in life? And if it's not God, you want to reevaluate that. So this was the hardest lesson that I learned in 2024. I was idolizing my work. I was idolizing my business. I was idolizing my likes, my shares, my downloads, my podcast guests, who was sharing my stuff, my metrics, how much money I was generating, all of that. I thought about it all the time. Even when I was on vacation, weekends, I was supposed to be decompressing. That's all I thought about. It would start from the moment I got up until I went to bed. And so I was placing my self-worth in how my business was doing. And if something didn't go well, or if somebody, people didn't like a post or a podcast episode, like, I was placing my self-worth in that, and I would get sad about it. A lot of why my business derailed in 2024 were a lot of things I had were out of my control, right? But it was also a huge lesson to me because I was idolizing my work. I had to surrender my business, myself to God in order to move forward. And so I put a lot of boundaries and parameters around my work now. I almost shut down many, many times completely. And I put God first. And I'm trying my hardest every day to be like him and to learn more about him. And that has been very profound. I no longer put my self-worth in my business. I am really excited to teach you new things and all of the things that are in Cortisol Calm that I know to be true and fair. That is the biggest thing that I learned in 2024 is not to idolize my work. So in 2025, as we move forward, what I will be teaching is what I now know is for certain about nutrition. I now know is certain about fasting and meal timing. And God meant all of this to happen so that I would change and grow and see things differently, learn new things, learn new strategies, and be in a place where I can serve him above all else, but also serve you as a community. So hopefully you got a few things out of this episode. I know it's not the usual teaching episodes, but it's very, very important for you to understand where I'm at, where I've been, and what you can expect from me moving forward. If you like this episode, please share it with a friend who you think would gain some knowledge from this. That would be wonderful. It helps my podcast grow as well because it has really taken a hit this last year. So share it with a friend. And if you'd be so kind to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, that will help me bounce back as well. So thanks so much for listening. Get in touch in 2025. Can't wait to teach you more. Good things are coming. And I'm very happy to close the door on